Hi, I'm Arthur Salzer, and I'm hosting Northland's The Artisan podcast. I'm here today with Robin Taub, who is a proud Torontonian born and raised. She has her CA and CPA designations and has written one of the greatest books on educating your kids, and it's called A Parent's Guide to Raising Money Smart Kids. Now, Robin, you've done a lot over the years to come to this point and write this book. Maybe you can talk about your experience first on why you fell into the accounting field and how that happened.
Yes, I will. Let me just first mention that A Parent's Guide to Raising Money Smart Kids was the first edition, and the book has been updated, and it's now called The Wisest Investment, Teaching Your Kids to Be Responsible, Independent, and Money Smart for Life. So yes, it was originally called A Parent's Guide to Raising Money Smart Kids.
And you've added it and expanded onto it.
I have, and I've updated it for the digital world that we live in now, and because it was originally published 13 years ago. So a lot has changed as we've moved away from cash. So just wanted to set that straight. But to answer your question, I kind of fell into accounting. When I was in high school, I really didn't have a clear idea of what I wanted to study. My father was a lawyer. My mother was a teacher by training. And unusually, I'm good at math. I'm good with numbers. And I'm also good with languages and words. So that's an unusual combination. And as I applied to university, and I went to the University of Toronto, initially I was studying a whole bunch of different things, but somehow a stroke of luck right before the deadline for course submissions, I changed my courses to the prerequisite for the commerce and finance program. So I had to take accounting, which I'd never taken, economics, and statistics, which I had taken. And then I took English and French because I liked languages. So once I was in university, I realized, oh, this is really interesting. I really like business and finance and economics. I'd always enjoyed. And my school, there were a lot of people, there were a lot of the professors were chartered accountants. That was what it was called at the time, CAs. Now we're chartered professional accountants. And as I got deeper into the program, by the end of my fourth year, I decided I was going to pursue the designation because I just liked the idea of having a professional designation on top of a business degree. I didn't think I was going to stay in accounting necessarily, but it's a fantastic grounding and foundation for the business world.
And after there, you transitioned into real estate. Was it because you understood how the financing works from the accounting side, or
Yeah.
was there something else to it?
Well, I worked at two different accounting firms. I worked at KPMG, and then I went to Ernst & Young, EY, and I was in tax. And one of my clients at EY was a organization that was putting together limited partnership real estate deals. So they were the general partner, and they were raising money through a limited partnership structure and buying real estate. At the time, they had done some properties in Canada, but when I joined, they were buying shopping centers in the US that came out of the savings and loans crisis. So it was a two-tiered limited partnership structure. And because I had the tax background, I had worked on their file in the accounting firm, like issuing the tax receipts to the investors. I joined them, and they were like almost a startup. So it was quite an underfunded organization, and I learned a lot, but I only stayed there for 2 years. I call them the horrible bosses. You know that movie? That's what they were.
Oh, I can imagine. And then, look, I mean, I was reading your bio,
Mm-hmm.
and then you jumped to derivatives,
Yeah, which is crazy, I know.
So for people that aren't in that marketplace, maybe what are derivatives, and what drew you into sales in that area?
Right. So derivatives examples, most well-known examples would be options or futures. So it's a security that derives its value from the underlying security. So a stock option would be an example. Commodities future would be another. Interest rate swaps is another example. So it was just one of those serendipitous things. Like I wanted to get out of that real estate syndication company, and somebody I knew from high school I happened to run into him, and he said, he'd been at Citibank for probably 7 years at that point. And he was like, we're hiring. But my boss, he's going to want to see your marks from university. And I was like, what? I've been out of university already for like at least 5 years. I have my, I'd passed my CA exams. I'm like, he wants to see my marks. Yes, that was one of the screens. So I had to submit my transcripts. I had a bunch of interviews and I ended up joining the marketing team. So we were almost in between the client and the traders. And the type of clients I had were financial institutions, which were the same kind of clients I'd had when I was in audit. So banks, brokerages, insurance companies that were looking to hedge their balance sheets or to hedge a particular product that they had, maybe a guaranteed investment certificate that was linked to the performance of a stock index or something like that. So that's what I did there. It was really interesting. And I worked with literal rocket scientists, like guys that had their PhDs, really smart people, worked on an open trading floor like you see in the movies. It was really cool.
That would be, but I mean, it doesn't add a lot of benefit, or at least, families don't see a lot of benefit, from derivatives markets. Again, you said it was something that's institutional.
Our clients were, yes.
Yeah, to go down the path of trying to help families and help kids and communicate better with them, and to have them learn really the fundamentals of finance. How did you pivot into that? It seems, finally you're applying some of your skills in the right way.
Well, it wasn't something that I actually planned. So what happened was I was at Citibank. I was in my late 20s, early 30s actually, and I had two young children. And my father passed away unexpectedly, and he left behind a fairly complicated estate. There was just a lot to do: file Canadian tax returns, file US tax returns. There was litigation. There was just a ton to do. And because of my background, and I have a brother as well, we were very involved with winding the estate up. And it took quite a long time. And I ended up taking initially just a leave of absence from Citibank to try and get the tax returns done, both in Canada and the US, before the deadlines. And then when that was finished, there was still so much to do. And I had young kids and it was just too much. So I ended up leaving, regrettably, because I really did enjoy the job. But that's when I first started realizing how my background was really valuable in terms of personal finance as well. And around 2008, after the global financial crisis, 2009 really, there was a task force in Canada, you may know this, on financial literacy. So there was suddenly a lot more awareness around the fact that the government felt that financial literacy was critical to Canadian economic growth and prosperity. So that's when it kind of hit me that I could bring my experience, my expertise, my education, and my skills with both numbers and words to try and help people make better financial decisions. And the way the book came about was that CPA Canada, the governing body of accountants in Canada, had done research that showed that parents in particular were struggling with teaching their kids about money. So they asked me to write the book. And that's where it started.
And parents probably still are today.
Oh, yeah.
I know governments, love to say things and that they're going to do things, but we're probably just as challenged today as we were then, if not even more so.
True. And I think, again, out of a crisis, sometimes there's this awareness. And I think with the pandemic, it was a wake up call that you have to be prepared financially because you don't know what's going to happen. Like, who saw that coming? So I agree that parents today are probably just as or overwhelmed by this as they were when I first got into this 13 years ago.
So, I mean, and that's really something that's quite important to us in Northland and to our families. And a lot of people, it's fun to talk about the financial wealth. What's going on in the stock market, or is there interesting, limited partnerships to invest in, or private
Mm-hmm.
companies. But
Mm-hmm.
really, the time when it's spent on the human capital, the education side, even more so than than creating special tax structures or trusts and estates. That human capital development is so critically important. And I guess the question to you is, at what ages should parents be, bringing that money discussion and educating their kids around wealth, whether they have it or not, and really how finance plays such a large part in their lives.
Whether they have it or not is an interesting point, and I still think you start early. So in my book, I suggest starting around the age of 5. When your kids start going to preschool is often when they start asking about money, or they see what other kids have and do. And as soon as your kid expresses any kind of curiosity or interest, really is the time. But I usually find that it does start at around 5 years old. And the reason I suggest parents start early is you want to lay a foundation and then build on it. And you want to make sure the information that you're sharing is age appropriate. So with young children, you're going to make sure that the lessons are things that they can relate to. And if you start when they're young, then you can make mistakes when the stakes are low. And, they're going to start to build knowledge, skills, and confidence, which is the definition of financial literacy, for when they get older and the stakes become higher, especially if they're going to become stewards of wealth.
Do you have any tips or suggestions on that 5-year-old stage?
Absolutely. So no matter what stage your kids are, so the way I think of it, I broke it up into 4 distinct age groups. So young kids, 5 to 8, preteens, 9 to 12, teenagers, 13 to 17, and emerging adults, 18 and over. So no matter what stage your kids are at, there are what I call 5 pillars of money. And those 5 pillars are earn, save, spend, share, and invest. So those 5 pillars never change, but the specific topics and examples for each of the 5 do as your kids get older. So with a young child, like people think, well, young kids aren't earning money, but they do get money, whether it's a small allowance or money for birthdays and holidays and from the tooth fairy. So as soon as you have any money coming in, you're going to have to make choices. And the choices are, do I save it, or how much to save, spend, share, and invest?
And I guess that brings a question about money itself from a savings perspective. For the last 10 years up until recently, savings accounts didn't really pay a lot of interest. It was basically zero. And today's rates, they really still haven't moved up at all either. So how do you deal with that conundrum of putting money aside but then not earning interest on it?
Mm-hmm.
How does a parent? Do parents understand that? And then how do parents educate their kids around that, to put money away?
Right.
But then,
yeah, no, that's a good question, because you try to explain to your kids that when you save money, you can earn interest on that. And again, you can get into compound interest, but let's just say when you're starting out, just introducing the concept of, let's say, a bank account, going from a piggy bank to a bank account. So most banks offer a youth account, and they traditionally don't pay much interest at all because they also don't have any fees attached. But I think you can still explain that this is a special account for young savers, to introduce them to, the benefits of using a bank account, which are, safety and security, and they're going to get a debit card that they can use to buy things in stores or to withdraw cash or to shop online. You can explain that once they graduate from a youth account to a student account or a regular account, there is that opportunity to earn interest. And once they're older, again, age appropriate information, you can explain what compound interest is, that you're earning interest on your interest as well as your original principal. They may also, at a certain point, maybe when they're preteens, take the money that's in their bank account and invest it in a GIC for a year. And you can explain again how locking it in means that you're going to earn a little bit more money. And now, as you say, with rates at the highest levels they've been in a while, you can get a pretty decent return on a GIC. So maybe it's a really good teachable moment. You can also just explain how banks work, because kids don't know. This is new to them. that they take money from you and they pay you for the use of that money. And then they in turn turn around and lend it out to someone else who needs it. So just there's so many teachable moments. And that's one of my favorite strategies to help parents teach their kids is just to find these conversations in their everyday lives.
So for parents that aren't literate, that they know themselves that they're not comfortable maybe, or they haven't been taught, or they didn't go to school for accounting or finance. Um, is your book really sort of a way maybe that they can help themselves and then also help their children?
Yes, you got it. So that is one of the problems that a lot of parents think like, how can I teach my kids about money if I'm not good at this myself, if I don't know myself how to do things properly. So I try to encourage parents that yes, you and your kids can learn together. It's such an opportunity for you to level up your money skills. And in fact, the first chapter of the book is really to help parents get their own financial houses in order so that they can be good financial role models and learn alongside with their kids. And to this end, I created these 11 healthy habits of financial management. Things like knowing where you stand financially, so your net worth and your cash flow, the importance of paying yourself first, of knowing the difference between good debt and bad debt. Those are just 3 examples, but there are 11 in the book.
And they're probably usable really for anybody of any economic means.
Yes, they are general principles. Now, obviously, when we're talking about high net worth families or ultra high net worth families, the context is different. Or families who are struggling, it's different. But the principles, the foundational principles of personal finance, are pretty universal.
Yeah, I would actually, very much agree with that, because I think one of the challenges when you do have a large net worth or a lot of cash flow, uh, most people don't find uh, finance fun in any way, shape, or form. They might like to speculate on the market because it's a thrill,
Mm-hmm.
but the actual work of putting together a balance sheet, looking at cash flows like you mentioned, they really don't want to do that,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't want to spend the time doing it. They'd rather go to
Mm-hmm.
the golf course or do something else. So they pay accountants, they pay um, financial advisors
Mm-hmm.
and family offices, and if they're not careful, they end up paying their lawyers through litigation, uh, because that's what happens when you don't do some of the work ahead of time. But do you find that's the case where a family growing up with the wealth, they expect it, or they think that trust money is going to come in every month, and they really don't have to pursue their dreams and passions as much as they should?
Yeah, it really depends on how the kids are raised and I guess the access they've had to the money. I mean, I've worked with family where there was only access to the money in terms of their education. This was a very, very wealthy family, but the kids did really not have access on a day-to-day basis to spend that money freely. They knew that there were trusts, they knew that there was wealth, but the only benefit that came to them was that they could pursue higher education and multiple degrees. So every family is unique, but I think a common concern amongst the wealth creators about the next generation is how do we raise kids who are grounded when we have all this money? How do we raise kids with a sense of purpose, not a sense of entitlement? And I think that's what you were getting at.
It's an absolute issue, or maybe even a sense of guilt. I've seen some families that um, the next generation feel guilty,
I've
and they
seen
actually
that,
want to
yeah.
give their money away as fast as possible, so that they somehow are equal with everybody else,
Mm-hmm.
which causes all sorts of challenges. But maybe if the family earlier on started with the steps that you outlined in your book, um, that really can be the right approach. So, I mean, what are what are some of the initial discussions? It's always
Yes.
better to start early, but what happens for families that are starting today that have,
Hmm.
maybe they're teenagers, maybe they're in their early 20s? How do you do this introduction to finance and money, and how do you
Yeah.
get them to do the work?
Well, first of all, you got to jump in at the stage that your child is at now, sharing information that's age appropriate. So if your child is a teenager and you've never had any money conversations, you're obviously not going to start with topics and examples and discussions as if they were 7 years old. Even though they don't know a lot, they've probably learned through the school of hard knocks and from osmosis and from their friends some stuff. So you have to jump in at the teenage stage. And again, the things that are important at that stage, for example, are they working? Do you expect them to work? Are they working in the family business if you have one? Or are they expected to get some kind of a job working for somebody else? In terms of spending, do you give them guidelines or a budget so that they don't feel like money is no object? When it comes to saving, are they setting goals? Are their goals meaningful to them? Are they tied to their values? So there's going to be specific things, again, we could get into investing and sharing as well at that stage. But again, the book is really structured so that there's specific topics and examples at each and every stage that are really relatable for any family. Like just even an open-ended conversation, like, what does having a lot of money mean? What is the meaning behind being rich? Is it just a financial measure, or are there some other things involved in terms of giving back and legacy? So there's so many interesting conversations. And again, take the cues from your own kid, and how they learn best, and when is a good time to talk about certain things. And everyone knows their own child best, so you also have to keep that in mind.
And what's the trick to, people today are a lot fitter. I mean, they're happy to go to the gym because
Mhm.
they see results. How do you coach or get people interested in their money so that they're constantly working on it and improving it? It doesn't seem like it's as much fun. It's fun to spend, to get the
Yeah.
shiny car or the nice house, but it's not always fun to save. How do you deal with those attitudes?
Again, I think it goes back to the savings piece goes back to your values. So your personal values, meaning the things in life that are most important to you, that you're willing to take a stand for. And a lot of wealthy families have strong family values that they want the next generation to embrace. Once you are clear on your values, then it's easier to set goals, savings goals, investment goals, life goals that are meaningful and compelling. And I actually created an exercise. It's in the book, but you can also find it for free on my website, robintaub.com. And it's called a values validator. And it's 20 statements that are designed to help you determine what your top 5 values are. And you just rate them.
So instead of taking out I mean, I guess people don't even play desktop games anymore like they used to as a family. But instead of video game time, you take this out and you say, all right, before we play video games, let's talk about what you think is important, and you would ask each family member. Is that sort of the approach?
Well, I think everyone has to do it individually because values are very personal. And it's also very revealing when partners or spouses do the exercise to see where the values overlap and where they differ. And then again, with your children, you want them to do it separately too, but absolutely then gather and compare and talk about, well, my top value is this, my least important value is that, and see where there's overlap and have a discussion about why those things are most important to you. Because I'm sure you've had this experience when you're not living in alignment with your values, when you're not spending in alignment with your values, there's a sense of dissonance or discomfort. Like it just doesn't feel good. But when you on the other hand, when you do spend in line with your values or you live in line with your values, then everything has purpose and meaning, including money. So I think it's a great idea. You can make it part of a family board game night too, and play a game that teaches about money, because that is one of my little tips. Like, you could play the game of life or Monopoly. Those are still great ways to teach younger kids about money. So you could do a whole combination of things as a family.
No, that's very cool. So, I mean, from the first edition of your book till today, I mean, a lot of things have happened over the past decade.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what what things do you think have significantly changed the the way people view, or the way families view finance today? Is there a difference? Is it?
Yes, I'd say it's the fact that we've really moved into a digital, almost cashless society. And before, a popular way to, and that was accelerated by the pandemic, I want to add. But before, a popular way to teach kids about money was with jars. I'm sure you've seen
Little
that.
piggy banks,
You've
yes.
heard that. In fact, it kind of came back into fashion with this envelope stuffing thing on TikTok. But, jars are really tangible and concrete. And it was just a way to say, like, okay, here's your saving jar, your spending jar, your giving jar, your investing jar. And you could see literally, like, right through it, how much money was in each of those things. Well, we're living in a world where no one's really using cash anymore. Like, I hardly ever use it. I always have some on me for emergencies, but it's not very often that I need to use it. Some businesses will only use, digital forms of payment. And our kids are growing up in that environment. And it just makes it, in some ways, more challenging, because spending is so frictionless and it is more fun, as you said earlier. So how do you
Just tap and go, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just tap your phone, your plastic, whatever it is. Or you're in a social media app and you see an ad and you can just purchase it like right within the app without even having to go out. So it's really tough. We live in a world that stresses instant gratification and consumption, and it's easy to spend. It's frictionless, whereas it's harder to save. It's just, there's more friction around it. We live in a commercial world. So that has become a challenge for parents and for kids. But on the other hand, all this tech, like fintech, financial technology, has given us a lot of great tools too. So now that we spend mostly digitally, there are great tools built into our mobile banking apps that can help us create and set budgets and notify us about spending levels or bank account levels. So there's definitely ways to harness the digital world in our favor to stay on top of our finances.
It's like having an assistant from the time that you're 15 and on, right?
Yeah, in your pocket. And kids are so good with tech and with their phones. They're really it's really natural to them to use those kind of tools.
So, are there solutions today for digital budgeting where you would set up, I don't know, a withdrawal or a transfer on a regular basis to go somewhere that you can't spend it, or to go into some type of
Yes.
of investment solution?
Yes, certainly. So you can set up automatic transfers. Most of the big banks in Canada, I'm sure in the US as well, you can do it probably online. You don't even have to go anywhere or speak to anyone. You just set up an automatic transfer. Most people do it the day they get paid or the day following payday. And it just puts the money into a separate savings, or can go right into an investment account. And that's what we call paying yourself first, because as soon as you get paid, you're taking some off the top and putting into a separate savings or an investment account where it can grow. And then you learn to live on what's left. So you don't wait until the end of the month to save, because sometimes you get to the end of the month, you're at the end of the money. In this case, you're prioritizing saving. You're paying yourself first.
Which is really the right way to do it. I mean, it's common sense, but it's so difficult for some people to do. But I think the automatic feature makes it much easier.
It takes the self-discipline out of the process. Exactly.
Absolutely. With with Canadian families today, do they need to learn about the different legal structures for for investing or for savings? Like, should they know the difference between a registered education savings plan and a registered retirement savings plan, or a tax-free savings account? Where should they be learning those things?
If you don't like paying tax, any more tax than is absolutely necessary, then yes, you have to learn how to take advantage of those types of registered accounts. So obviously your bank is going to have, or your broker is going to have information on these types of accounts. I do talk about them in my book, just in terms of when to introduce them to your children. But there's a great, the Ontario Securities Commission created a website called Get Smarter About Money. And it's a financial literacy website full of terms and definitions and examples. And I used to contribute to it. And that's a really good place to learn because the information is unbiased and objective. They're not selling you anything. It's just the whole purpose is consumer education. So yes, understanding, our ESP, Registered Education Savings Plan, is to help save for kids post-secondary. Our RSP is for retirement. TFSA, tax-free savings account. Now we have the new first home savings account, FHSA. There's an alphabet soup of acronyms out there. And again, there's advantages to using them. They all have different features and benefits in terms of, is a contribution tax deductible or withdrawals tax-free? So I suggest that you take a look at Get Smarter About Money, because it will have comparison charts so you can educate yourself about the differences and the uses. When do you use these types of accounts?
For kids that are keen, about finance, or families that are, is sharing the details or how a registered education savings plan is invested with the kids. Is that where you could get into a discussion about different types of asset classes or investing areas, and then how they commingle or work together to provide diversification and potentially better risk adjusted returns?
Absolutely. That's a good example of a teachable moment. And I did that with my kids, because I did set up RESPs for them when they were in school, before they were ready to go to university. And we did talk about what the funds were invested in and whether they were growth assets, or as they got closer to going to university, I didn't want to invest in riskier assets like stocks, because I knew I needed the money fairly soon. So I was selling things and leaving it in more liquid assets. And then, they were involved every year when we had to withdraw from the RESP, because they had to get a certificate from the school indicating that they were enrolled in a full-time qualifying post-secondary program. So they knew what was involved. I think I tried to explain that some of the money we were taking out was the money we put in. Some of the money was the growth, the income that we had earned on it. As well as, with RESPs, the government, when you contribute, the government matches your contributions up to a certain amount. So we talked about that as well, because again, when you withdraw, the way it's taxed, some of it is taxed in the hands of the student. Like everything but the original capital is taxed in the hand of the student. So that would show up, they would get a T4A with the withdrawals. So when they had to file their return, so it's such a good opportunity to talk to them about investing, about education, about saving, about future earning. It's great.
It really seems the place to start, and setting an example and doing the path together, the journey together.
Yeah,
is incredibly important. And I think you were talking about values, but by spending that time together and communicating the values of saving, of budgeting, of trying to minimize tax leakage, gets passed on to your kids very easily. And I'm sure once that they're in their 20s, they'll be off on a much stronger foot than they would have if you hadn't spent that time with them.
Yeah, I mean, my kids used to tell me that when they were at university, they felt like they had a much better understanding of their finances and their day-to-day managing a budget. Because if they're living out of town off campus, they have to pay rent to a landlord, they've got a food budget, transportation, all that kind of stuff. My kids felt like some of their peers just were like clueless. They just didn't know. But because, again, I had always talked to my kids about this, I was lucky because of, as I mentioned, my background, and I knew it was important for them to learn and understand, and it was a priority for me. So they felt like they were much more prepared, and they did a good job of managing.
Now, did they do their own tax returns, or did they hire mom?
Well, my daughter's also an accountant by training.
Oh, fantastic.
And no, I've made sure that my kids understand how to do their own returns. And it was a bit complicated because I originally put them all under one account, and then it became very difficult to split it off. But what I usually do is I have them come over and they sit at my desk and they do their own returns. And then I'm there because we use a product like TurboTax. And then I'm there to answer questions. And if it gets a little tricky or complicated, but it's actually, again, I look forward to it because they bring their slips, and we just go through everything. And it's a good opportunity to have a discussion and do some financial planning. But yeah, like I don't want to be doing their returns for the rest of my life. So I taught them how to do their own.
Learning, by doing is incredibly important.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you must run into situations though where um, either people haven't started or they're actually doing the exact opposite of what they should be. Um, maybe you could share. I don't know if you've seen it, but could you share sort of a worst case story
Yeah.
and maybe how you saw it corrected if you were lucky?
Well, a lot of people do say to me like, well, my kids are already teens and I haven't started teaching them about money. Is it too late? Or, if it's a wealthy family, their kids' spending is totally out of control because they're using a supplementary card on a family visa instead of using their own card. So in that case, and that's often the case for kids who are under the age of majority, 18 or 19, they have a card for emergencies, but they never see the bill, they never make the payments, they have no idea how it all works. And it's, as we just talked about, it's so frictionless and easy to spend. So I do hear a lot of that where their kids' spending is just out of control and they don't understand how much it adds up to, or they don't have a good appreciation of the value of the dollar. So again, it's never too late. Like that expression that the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, but the second best time is now. So just start. Don't let the fact that you haven't started deter you. So just start, jump in at the stage your children are at. But if it is one of these cases of like excessive spending, and even when you have or make a lot of money, you can still spend more than you can still live beyond your means. Like it is possible. Think of all these broke and bankrupt professional athletes, celebrities. It's not about
Private jets are expensive, aren't they?
yeah, when you get to that level, yeah, or yachts, we're talking about huge budgets. But you can still get yourself into trouble. So, you want to start teaching them again about these 5 pillars of money, explain how to budget, get them their own credit card. Once they've reached the age of majority, set the limit low, make them pay their own bill. As much as they can be spending their own money and not yours. So money they work for, even if it's an allowance, if it's their own money, they're going to think a lot longer and harder about spending it. They're going to feel more accountable for it. If they're just spending your money, it just doesn't register. So get them to start spending their money. Talk to them about needs and wants. That's a really important conversation to have. And, you want to try starting to put things in perspective for them. So talk about giving back, talk about gratitude. There's so many ways to address these issues of entitlement.
You hit that a nail on the head. One of the things that I noticed between Canadian families and American families is probably the level of giving back to society, to creating foundations, doing charitable work. It seems here under more of a socialist bent, there's either less desire or maybe less money to do that. We always think the government's going to you need to do that, for society. Whereas, in the U.S., creating foundations and giving back and spending that time to, to share the wealth, with areas that the family believes in, seems to be a much higher proportion of families doing that.
That's really interesting. Maybe, like you say, because we have a social safety net here, that there's a feeling that there's less need, but I don't even think that's necessarily true. And obviously, if you're supporting the arts, there's never enough money. Even like, our healthcare system, like, it's free. I mean, we pay taxes, so it's free, but it's underfunded, right? So a lot of people want to support hospitals and fundraising for those types of institutions. So I don't know, I feel like in the US, there's just so much more generational wealth than in Canada. And that might be, again, one of the reasons, like, you don't see as much big foundations or big philanthropy here. Maybe we just don't have as many billionaires and, generational wealthy families. We're starting to, obviously, but I feel like we're behind the US, like we are in many things.
Yeah, but we're gaining rapidly.
We're catching up, yeah.
Because of education and books like you've written. For some of our families, and maybe this will just sort of wrap it up.
Mm-hmm.
When families do have significant wealth relative to many Canadians, stewardship is really an issue. Do you have any words of wisdom on stewardship and how how to protect that wealth over generations?
I think education is the key, and making sure it's a priority for your family. If you're working with an advisor or an office, to make sure that they're helping you with that, because often parents, if they don't feel comfortable taking the lead on it, they have advisors that they can turn to. So make sure that you're leveraging those resources. But I think, like, most families would want, as a bare minimum, their kids to have some financial literacy education in order to become stewards of wealth. And now, there are programs that you can do that accredit these beneficiaries, so that the parents, the wealth creators, know that they have some basic level of education. They also know how to work with advisors, and it takes away some of that fear and concern that they're not prepared to manage or handle a windfall, that they might blow their trust fund or inheritance. So I think, I'm not saying every kid is going to be a financial expert, but having some basic level of knowledge that they can work with the experts and quarterback and ultimately be the one that makes the decisions and is accountable, I think is really important. And I think most parents, most families would agree.
No, absolutely. And I just want to thank you today, Robin Taub. You're the award-winning author of The Wisest Investment, teaching your kids to be responsible, independent, and money smart for life. And that's definitely going to go on the reading list, the recommended reading.
Thank you.
Here at Northland for our families.
Great.
And we'll talk about getting some copies for families with the next generation starting out, that we'll get from you and give out to them.
That would be great.
Thank you so much for your time today. It's greatly appreciated.
My pleasure.